Hi YouTube, now welcome back to our channel. In today's case, we're actually going to be talking about something very interesting. I heard about this a little while ago and I looked into it and I couldn't help but think that this sounded quite a lot like this missing 411 phenomenon. Now, if you don't know what that is, I would highly suggest looking it up. Definitely Google it. Watch the documentaries on Amazon Prime. It's called Missing 411 and Missing 411 Hunted. That will give you a very good idea as to why I am making this connection. And then we'll also talk about it a little bit further when we get to the theory section. Now, before I get into today's video, I just want to send you guys a quick reminder to please consider subscribing if you enjoy this type of content. We post 2 to 3 times a week, and we enjoy talking about stuff like this, like unsolved mysteries, paranormal phenomenon, and true crime. Okay, so let's get into today's story. Now, the case today actually takes place in an area called the Bennington Triangle. Now, this area is actually considered to be very unusual. There's a lot of weird things going on here. People have even compared it to the Bermuda Triangle. Now, if you don't know what the Bermuda Triangle is, it's basically a triangular area between Miami, Bermuda, and Cuba where a lot of people go missing. So a lot of planes go missing there, a lot of ships. They somehow just vanish in this area and people have never found them. Now, the same type of thing is actually happening in the Bennington Triangle. Now, it's been reported that there have been over 40 people that have actually gone missing in this area. But it was between 1945 and 1950 that 5 specific cases actually happened, and they were fairly close to each other, and some of them were very unusual, strange circumstances that they actually brought a lot of attention to the area and have gotten people really talking about what could possibly be going on here. Now, aside from people going missing, there's also a lot of talk about what phenomenon could be at play. There's a lot of sightings and reportings of stuff like UFOs. There's strange lights in the sky. There's people saying that this could be Bigfoot. And of course, there are people that come up with more practical explanations, and we'll get into those later. But those also don't make a lot of sense, which leads people to wonder what is really going on here. Now, the first case is about Mitty Reavers, and this was in 1945. Now, he was a 74-year-old experienced hunter, and he was also a local tour guide for anyone that came into the area wanting a tour of the region, of the forest, and of the mountain. So on the day he went missing, he was actually giving a tour to 4 other hunters. And as they were making their way through the mountain, they actually got separated. Mitty got separated from the rest of the group. Now, the group wasn't too freaked out about this. They knew that he was a very well-experienced hunter. He knew the area very well. He had plenty of survival skills. So they figured that he would either rejoin them later or that he would somehow manage to save himself and seek safety in a matter of hours, if not within the hour. Unfortunately, that never came. Mitty was actually never seen again. Over 300 people were out searching for Mitty as soon as he was reported as missing, and this spanned over 8 days as well. They searched high and low. They went throughout the entire mountain, throughout the forested areas, and there was really absolutely no sign of Mitty, and to this day, he hasn't been found. The next case takes place on Sunday, December 1st, 1946, and it was about Paula Weldon. She was an 18-year-old college student at Bennington College. Now, that Sunday, she was last seen by several people actually going towards the long trail at the Glastonbury Mountain. She was actually going for a hike that day. So she was seen by quite a few people, and they actually reported as seeing her wearing red clothing. On Monday, the following day, she was actually absent from all of her classes that day. And this is when her friends and other classmates that she knew started reporting her as missing because it was very unusual for her to miss her classes. Immediately, obviously, people start searching for her. They did the same type of intense search as they did for Mitty. And there were actually up to 1,000 people looking for Paula. Now, they assumed that because she was wearing red, it would be fairly easy to spot her in the forest or somewhere up in the mountain. But unfortunately, There was absolutely zero clues found about Paula. No one knows what happened to her, and to this day, she is still missing. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit weird. So, 3 years, exactly 3 years after, to the day that Paula went missing, another man called James Tedford went missing on December 1st, 1949. So the last time James was seen was when he boarded a bus going to Bennington from a different area in Vermont after he had spent some time visiting family. So he gets on this bus and people remember seeing him. Other passengers on the bus recall seeing him, and the bus driver was also able to pinpoint him as well. Now, what's important to note is that the bus driver remembered seeing him up until the second last stop before it got to Bennington. So somewhere in between the second last stop and the very last stop at Bennington, James disappeared. No one remembered him getting off the bus at any of the previous stops. The bus driver was able to remember seeing him there, and the bus driver also noted that he did not stop between the second last stop and the final stop at Bennington. So physically, there was really no way for James to have gotten off the bus, which led people to really just come to the only conclusion, as strange as it was, that he somehow vanished into thin air. Now, when authorities searched the bus, they did find his luggage. It was still in the overhead bin. And then on his seat was actually an opened up timetable, a schedule of the buses. So other than that, there was absolutely no clues that led police anywhere closer to determining what could have happened to James. The next case is about Paul Jepson, and this took place in October 1950. Now, at this time, Paul was only 8 years old, and on that day, he was actually with his mother. Now, I wasn't able to find too much information on what his mother's job was, but it seemed like she was some sort of caretaker for pigs at a local house or some sort of farm. So she was tending to the pigs, and Paul was actually playing inside the family pickup truck. And that was the last time his mother saw him. She turned her back and went to do her job, and then when she came back, Paul was missing. Like any mother would do, she reported him missing, and right away the search for him started. Now, one of the investigators actually decided to bring in a bloodhound to see if they could pick up on Paul's scent. And it worked. So the dog started sniffing, and he was able to pick up on Paul's scent and followed it for a little bit up until he got to an intersection where the roads were crossing, and that's where he loses it. Now, police thought that this could have meant that he probably was kidnapped. Some car probably stopped, saw him by himself, picked him up, and drove off, which is why the dog suddenly just randomly loses the scent of Paul. But what makes this story a little bit creepy is that Paul's father actually made a comment to police officers saying that the woods finally got him, or that the woods were calling out to my son. And this comes from Paul's behavior a few days prior to when he went missing. Paul's father actually reported that his son had been very obsessively talking about the forest. He was talking about it nonstop, about how he really wanted to go, that he needed to go to this area. And his father thought it was very, very weird, but because he was only 8 years old, he kind of brushed it off to his imagination, not knowing that only a few days later, his son would go missing in the very same woods. Now, the next case takes place only 2 weeks after Paul went missing, and this was about Frida Langer. Now, she was a 53-year-old hiker. She was very experienced in hiking. She knew the area as well and really enjoyed spending time outdoors, so there's no reason for her to really have gone missing without a trace. Now, on the day she went missing, she was actually out camping with her husband and her cousin. Now, her husband had apparently injured himself, so he decided to opt out of the hike that day and kind of just lay low back at the campsite while Frida and her cousin went on a hike. So as Frida and her cousin are out on their trail, they're out hiking, they're having a nice time, Frida actually stumbles, she trips over something, and she falls into a nearby creek. And this ended up resulting in her getting completely soaked and not wanting to continue the hike that way. She decided that she would go back to the campsite to get changed while her cousin continued on the hike by himself. Now, that was the last time her cousin would ever see Frida again. The last time he saw her, she was walking back in the direction where they had come from. Now, her husband being at the campsite, he reported that she never came back. only her cousin eventually came back. Very unusual circumstances. She never made it back to the campsite, which was fairly unusual considering how well marked the trails were in the area. Again, like the previous cases, there was a very extensive search done for her. People were searching high and low. They were searching all of the areas that they could think a person could wander into. And surprisingly, 6 months later, Frida's body was actually found in a very open area that had been previously searched. Now, this is another characteristic of the missing 411 phenomenon. When people are found, and this doesn't happen quite often, but when people are found, they're often found in areas that were previously searched, and it would make very little sense for their body to be out so wide in the open in such an obvious place that it doesn't make sense for searchers to have missed the body at the beginning. Regardless, her body was found 6 months later, but because so much time had passed, her body had actually been so badly decomposed that authorities were not able to determine a cause of death. All right, so now that you've heard about these 5 strange and unusual cases, let's get into some of the theories. Now, there's been quite a lot of talk about what could be going on here, which is why this area has gotten so much attention lately. Now, the first theory actually comes from the Native Americans, and they have this very strong belief that the area is actually cursed. Now, this belief or this theory actually comes from the idea that the Native Americans seem to believe that the mountain, specifically Glastonbury Mountain, is actually a meeting point where all 4 winds clash together: north, south, east, and west. And all these 4 winds together meet at this one point on the mountain, and this causes a lot of tension, a lot of friction, which develops into negative energy and results in a lot of strange phenomenon happening in this area, including really odd weather events. This idea of the curse being real is reinforced by an event that happened not too long ago by 4 investigators that were looking into the Bennington Triangle. So what happened is that they were out investigating, they were hiking their way up the mountain, when all of a sudden a really thick fog rolled in unexpectedly, and then it also started raining. There was a huge thunderstorm that started happening. Now, the 4 friends, the 4 investigators were a little freaked out. The fog was way too thick for them to figure out where they were going, so they decided to stay put and wait it out for as long as they could. Eventually, the fog did fade and the rain stopped, so they were able to make their way back down to the flatlands. Now, when they got back down to the flatlands, they realized that the ground was dry. And this was very weird to them considering how heavy the thunderstorm had been. So they started asking locals in the area if it had rained, and everyone told them that there was no rain that day. The next explanation is Bigfoot. Now, I know a lot of people are very skeptical about Bigfoot, even if it exists, but it wouldn't be a case about the forests without Bigfoot, considering how many people basically relate Bigfoot to living out in the woods. Since the 1800s, like I mentioned earlier in the video, a lot of people have reported Bigfoot sightings in the region, so much so that people have actually dubbed it the Bennington Monster. And one of the more famous cases actually took place quite a while ago. I wasn't able to find an exact date, but it was during the time where there was stagecoaches still as a means of transportation for people. There was a stagecoach passing through the area full of passengers when people started noticing very, very big human-like footprints in the mud. Now, they were able to tell they were very human-like, they had all the toes, but they were abnormally large. So people started wondering what this could be, when all of a sudden something very, very large tackles the stagecoach, knocks it over, and starts terrorizing all the people that were on it. And all people could remember from whatever this was is that it was very, very tall, at least 7 feet tall. It was dark haired, very, very heavy. It had a foul odor. And as quickly as the whole event started, it ended with this thing or whatever it was running into the forest, leaving everyone very traumatized. The next theory is a little bit more practical, and it's actually the thought of it being a serial killer. Now, this does make a lot of sense when you first look into it, but as you start to get a little bit deeper and deeper, and understand what makes a serial killer, you realize that this doesn't make sense. So serial killers usually target a specific type of person, something that they all have in common. But all of these people, aside from the region where they went missing, had absolutely nothing in common. They were all different ages. They were both men and women, children versus adults. So people were very, very quickly to rule out that this could be a serial killer, not to mention that there were no clues pointing them in that direction. The next theory is actually wild animal attacks. Yes, this makes a lot of sense, especially considering where this happened, but a lot of people seem to wonder why there were no signs of an animal attack if these people did go missing, not to mention that James was on a bus when he went missing. So if you're attacked by an animal, you're not going to go quietly. You're not going to be like, okay, well, this is happening. People will start screaming. People will start fighting for their lives, and there will be some signs of a struggle. So animals will kind of just rip through the clothing, and there will likely be some blood at the scene. Now, what's odd about this is that there were no such signs of distress at any of these points, especially in Paul's case. He was in the pickup truck. There was no signs of blood there. His clothes was not torn off. So people were also wanting to believe that this could have been an explanation, but the evidence really didn't back up this theory at all. Which leads me to the final theory about missing 411. So I will give you a little bit of a background on this. So the investigator, like I mentioned earlier, his name is David Paulides, and he has been researching the strange phenomenon that is causing people to disappear in forested areas across North America, so across Canada and the US. Now, what makes these things very strange is that people disappear almost like they're vanishing into thin air. People are easily able to rule out animal attacks for the reason I mentioned in the previous theory. People will often vanish in the blink of an eye. Oftentimes a family member or a friend will be there and they turn around for a second, and when they turn back around, the person will be completely gone and they didn't hear anything. So this leads people to believe that there's no animal attack, there's no kidnapping going on. Oftentimes people are found very far away from where they went missing, which makes it even more confusing. Sometimes the distance where people are later found doesn't make sense based on how far they could travel. And then oftentimes people, when they are found, whether they are dead or alive, they're actually found in areas that were previously searched, like what happened to Frida. Now, the interesting part about this phenomenon and this theory of missing 411 is that the investigator, David Paulides, doesn't actually give people a theory or an explanation as to what is going on. He leaves that very open-ended, and I'm assuming it's because he wants people to kind of draw their own conclusion. But he gives quite a lot of startling evidence as to what could possibly be going on. And a lot of it seems to point towards some sort of paranormal phenomenon, which does include something like Bigfoot or UFOs. So if you haven't seen these documentaries, I highly suggest you guys go watch them. Okay, so that does it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What do you think is happening in the Bennington Triangle? Is it people just going missing under strange circumstances, getting lost out in the woods? Is it animal attacks? Is it Bigfoot, UFOs? Is it the missing 411 phenomenon? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and we will see you guys in the next video.